This is supposed to be a basic guide for people just getting into solar or wanting to educate themselves a little bit more with the very rudimentary basics of your solar and electrical setup. One thing I was always confused about going into making my solar setup was the very basics. I found myself in YouTube videos or forums to get this going, and then you'll need to go look at charts or look at YouTube videos to figure out exactly the amperage ratings, voltage, all of that jazz. So here we go, let's dive right in. We're going to talk about fuses, the inverter, solar charger, wire size, 12 volt or 120 volt, grommets, as well as preventing cut and frayed wires, and grounds. Fuses are essentially to stop electricity from doing something it's not to, almost like a fail-safe switch. These do this automatically. For instance, a negative and a positive were to touch each other, or it were to get cut and touch something it's not supposed to touch, it will pop this fuse and cause your system to stop giving electricity. Now this is a very important safety mechanism and can save something from burning down. Now you'll often hear an inverter or an inverter charger. An inverter takes the power out of your batteries and converts it into 120 volt, or otherwise known as your wall outlet power. Now if you have an inverter charger, you can also have this where you can put 120 volt into that charger and it'll run back to your batteries, like a battery charger. That's exactly what this is. It's acting as a battery charger as well as giving your device 120 volt power so you can use common wall outlets. Now your charge controller is another necessity in your solar setup. Your charge controller is going to take your solar panels' unpredictable energy coming from the sun, and it takes it and meters it down into a predictable, smooth flow for your batteries to take without overheating or taking in too much electricity at one time. This is very important, otherwise you could blow up your batteries or just cause battery failure. This will extend the life of your batteries and keep them from being a potential hazard. Now this is going to change based on your batteries that you use, your inverter, or your solar panels, or your charge controller. You're just going to have to go find other information about that online. I found a couple of helpful articles that I'll leave in the description below that you can go ahead and take a look. Otherwise you can just search on YouTube or Google for the information you're looking for. The way I have this set up is I have the electricity going from our inverter into a breaker box. Now what this breaker box does is I can put one circuit of 120 volt power into this breaker box, and then I can split it to multiple circuits. Now this also acts as essentially another fuse inside the breaker box. It's going to take this one circuit from the inverter and then we can split it off so we can have, for instance, an east wall electrical, west wall, south, and north. So that way if you have a short or an issue with your wiring, you can hone it down to one specific section. As well as if you pull too many amps out, these breakers will flip off so that way you don't heat up the wires. Now another super important thing is wire size. As a rule of thumb, I went with the larger the wire the better. If you go with the small wire, you can heat up the wire and melt it, causing an electrical fire, or just not transport enough electricity that you need to. I like to think of wires kind of like water pipes. You can only transport so much water through, let's say, this size of a pipe. Now if you were to get a pipe this large, you could transport a lot more water through that. That's essentially how I think of cable size in electrical. There are charts that will show you the size of wire you need for how much electricity is running through it, as well as the distance you are running this wire. Now in my solar system, there is two voltages that we're working with. We're working with 12 volts out of our batteries, and then 120 volt, which is what the inverter is supplying. So the inverter is going to take your 12 volts out of your batteries and then amp it up to 120 volt AC power. So batteries run off of DC or direct current, where these wall outlets that we plug in household appliance run 120 volt AC, or also commonly known as 110 volt, depending on what system you're running. Another very important thing if you are running electrical in a bus or van or something that's moving and rattling around is ensuring that these wires don't fray or get cut or pull out. So this means strong connections, or if it's touching anything, ensure that it's not going to cut through, such as rubber grommets, zip ties, or other things to stabilize and stop the wire from rattling and essentially sawing its way through. Now that's why you have a rubber insulator on the outside of wires, is so that way you don't touch other metal objects with these wires. It's very important, otherwise you'll trip a fuse or burn your house down. Now solar panels, essentially what they do is take energy from the sun and convert it into electricity that we can use for our everyday use. It goes from your solar panels, which essentially collects your energy, comes down to your charge controller, converting that unpredictable energy into something predictable and readable, goes into your batteries to store this energy when the sun is not out, such as nighttime, and it can be stored in there until you use it, and then you pull this out and go directly into a 12-volt circuit, which can power vehicle applications such as 12-volt USB ports, 12-volt lights, 12-volt cigarette lighter, or you can run this power to an inverter that converts it to your wall power that you can plug household appliances in. Now underneath me is actually where I store all of our charge controller and inverter. Here's a look into essentially our computer case here, which is underneath our bench. Here we have a self-suppressant fireball that I just get a peace of mind. If anything in here were to catch fire, this would hopefully put it out. Why I say this is kind of like a computer case is because I have a fan blowing air in, and then these fans are venting air out, kind of creating a cool flowing path of air through here. This here is our charge controller. There's power coming directly from the solar panels into this charge controller. From here we are routing the power down here and through down into our batteries. From our batteries we are coming up and going into this block here. This here is a fuse block for our 12-volt electricity, along with a bunch of fuses on it. We also have it coming up into our inverter. This is our large inverter charger, so this, as well as converting 12-volt power into 120-volt power, also can charge our batteries if plugged in with a extension cord from a grid plug, otherwise known as shore power. Down here we have one fuse that is to stop the flow of power going into our inverter, and then another fuse stopping the flow of power coming from our charge controller. So if there was an issue with the wiring from our charge controller, it would stop the electricity from flowing, or if there's an issue coming from our inverter, it would also stop the flow of electricity. Now on this side you can see that there's a couple of wires hooked into this one block. We have a black box, which is almost always commonly known as ground or negative, and we have a red block that is almost commonly known as positive. Essentially what this negative block does here is I have one negative wire going back to our batteries and then also to our frame. All of these other negatives that come off of here are grounding out our electrical system, such as our inverter or a charge controller, or our 12-volt fuse block. Our positive is essentially the same thing, except it's coming in our positive power and then distributing to all of our supplies that we need. This here is our breaker box. I only have one circuit coming out of it for our application. This is what you call a breaker, and that's why it's a breaker box. It harnesses these breakers. As you can see here, there's wires coming in from our inverter, and then these wires coming out go to our 120-volt outlets. You can get these much larger so you can have multiple circuits on one breaker box. These are very commonly found on the side of your house. I'm sure in the past you've had to go outside and switch this on and off if you've made a mistake with your electricity. I don't claim to be an electrician. I just learned this information online and used it in my application. I'm sure I'm wrong about some things, but hopefully this can simplify it so that way you can take this knowledge and progress in your research. If you have any suggestions or anything I missed out, please let me know in the comments below.